Hello, my name is Axel González, a student of the English Teaching Master at Iexpro University. The present video intends to explain the last part of the literature provided in the course, Approaches to Language in the Classroom Context. Throughout the course, we took a look at what interlanguage is, what its characteristics are, and what factors influence its construction. So before we start, I think it's important to recall what interlanguage is. So here we go. According to Selinker's theory, interlanguage is a linguistic system that has been developed by the learner during the learning process. This interlanguage preserves some features of the native language and can also overgeneralize some features of the second language. That was just a quick reminder of what interlanguage is. Now we will talk about the roles of input, interaction, and context in second language acquisition. So first, what's input? Input is the second language information that the individual language learner is exposed to. So for example, in the classroom context, teachers can provide students with different types of input through authentic materials such as movies, right here, in its original language. Also, we have books, which can be complete novels, or could be graded readers, or short stories. And we also have magazines that can help in the building of interlanguage and the second language, as well as different kinds of podcasts and videos that we can find online. Now that we know what input is, we can continue. One of the most remarkable research works on input is the one proposed by Krashen. He, along with Spolsky, hypothesized that input has to be sufficient in terms of quantity. The more time spent learning any aspect of a second language, the more will be learned. This is a problem that English as a foreign language teachers have to face. Our students do not have the same exposure to target language as those who live in a country immersed in the target language. So we must make extra efforts for our students to receive a sufficient amount of input of the target language. Apart from that, it's not only the amount of input, but the quality as well. Krashen considers that human beings acquire language in only one possible way: by understanding messages or receiving what he calls comprehensible input. Comprehensible input is then defined by Krashen as what I know plus 1, which means that input must be slightly beyond a student's level. Also, some authors consider that frequency is an important element in second language acquisition. Frequency, according to Dalley, Burt, and Krashen, is the number of times the individual hears or sees a specific target language form. Theoretically speaking, frequency would increase the probability of appearance of those structures the individual is ready to process. So, the more a linguistic item is repeated, the more likely it would be for the learner to acquire it. Now, let's talk about intake. According to some scholars in the second language acquisition domain, for input to be transformed into intake, the language data needs to be presented in a manner which stimulates the possible assimilation, and the content of the language needs to be compatible with the individual's previous linguistic knowledge. In a few words, input has to be meaningful and understandable for the individual. And how do we make it understandable? By making it personal and simple. Simplifying the input makes it easier for students to recognize the forms of the language. Summarizing what we have been talking, input must be comprehensible, personalized, and linguistically simplified. Regarding interaction, as teachers we know that learning a language requires more than receiving input. We also need to produce language. For this section, Some scholars wonder if learners should take the role of a merely receptor of input or take a more active role of a participant in a conversation. First, let's talk about the receptor role. For some researchers, as Krashen, in the first stage of language learning, individuals must not be forced to produce language. They are expected to be in a silent period instead, and as they receive more and more input, they will eventually be ready to speak. However, some factors such as learners' personality and communicative needs to be fulfilled may impede a silent period. This is why some authors, such as Swain, claim that the most important element in the learning process is comprehensible output, which means that receiving and understanding messages is not enough. Learners have to produce in order for acquisition to take place. Before we continue, it's important to clarify what output is. Output is understood as any spoken or written piece of information the students produce using the second or target language. Now, retaking Swain, he suggests that the chances of successful language acquisition are higher when the individual has the opportunity of organizing his or her output during interaction with an interlocutor. Now, what is the exact type of interaction that we expect from our students? When students get engaged in conversation, it may happen that their interlocutor, who could be a native speaker, indicates that he or she does not understand the message that the learner is trying to convey. Faced with the need to modify the output, the learner will try to use new structures and forms and will exploit its interlanguage in an effort to be understood. This is what authors would call negotiation, and it appears to be a fundamental part of the learner interaction. Many authors give interaction a predominant role in second language acquisition and claim that its benefits can be listed as follows. As number one, we have that interaction allows the learner to practice his or her acquired linguistic knowledge through output. As number two, we have the opportunities for trying to produce new morphological and syntactic structures are increased, as are the possibilities for experimenting with and hypothesizing about language. As number three, interaction generates input, procuring in this way more data about the target language for the learner. As number four, interaction facilitates the obtaining of personalized input, which increases the individual's attention to the message. Finally, as number five, we have that because of the communicative nature of interaction, it is adapted to the learner's linguistic level, being modified or simplified when the understanding of messages requires it. Now that we saw the roles of interaction in second language acquisition, let's move on to the role of context. Second language acquisition may occur in two types of context. It could be in a formal or a natural one. The formal context refers to classroom-type situations where there is explicit focus on the conscious learning of the rules and grammatical forms. Some authors suggest that formal instruction can have a positive effect on adults, in the sense that it makes it possible for them to check their progress in the learning process. An issue against the classroom context is that meaning and communication are easily fostered in the natural context, whereas teachers focus too much on linguistic forms in the classroom. Let's talk about the characteristics of language in the classroom context. We have three elements that stand out. The first is teacher talk. When teachers address learners, they tend to modify their speech to adopt a medium register. That is to say, a register which they consider to be comprehensible to the majority of learners. The second element is interaction analysis, that takes into account all the participants in a communicative act. And the third element is discourse analysis, in which there are 4 basic types of target language use. Number 1, it's mechanical. There is no communicative exchange. Number 2 is meaningful. Language is contextualized, but there is no exchange of real information. Number 3 is pseudo-communicative. There is some information exchange, but in a different way from what would happen outside the classroom, in natural contexts. And number 4, real communicative, natural and spontaneous language use. Regarding the natural context, we can differentiate teacher talk from foreigner talk. Foreigner talk are speech modifications by native speakers in the use of the target language when the interlocutor is not a native speaker. In other words, native speakers talk differently to foreigners. This different type of language is known as foreigner talk. Some of the characteristics that influence foreigner talk are simplification to facilitate communication, the disposition of the non-native speakers, the subject of conversation, the non-native speakers level of the target language, and the non-native speaker's age. Apart from that, the language used by the native speaker is characterized by its grammatical correctness, no matter who the interlocutor is. In conclusion, we can say that there are many elements and factors that affect second language acquisition, and it's up to us, language teachers, who must take responsibility for our students to keep on constructing their interlanguage in order to attain the ultimate goal, which is to learn the language. Thank you for watching.